Aston Martin just admitted something that could either save their entire season, or expose a much bigger problem than anyone expected. Weeks ago, the AMR26 was running seconds off the pace. Power restricted. Race simulations cut short. And a vibration issue so serious it was physically damaging the Honda battery system. That is not a small reliability concern. That is a structural crisis before race 1. But now, ahead of the Australian Grand Prix, Aston Martin has revealed major Honda engine upgrades. Reinforced battery architecture. Reworked hybrid deployment. A redesigned cooling approach that literally changes how the car breathes. This is not a tweak. This is a first race intervention under maximum pressure. 300 kilometers in Melbourne. Full throttle. Full deployment. No hiding behind test programs. If these upgrades hold, Aston Martin unlocks the true potential of one of the most radical cars on the grid. If they fail, the entire Newey Honda era starts under immediate doubt. And what they just revealed about the scale of the problem makes this weekend far bigger than anyone realizes. Subscribe now, because what happens in Australia could redefine this season before it even begins. Let's start with what really happened in Bahrain. Because the lap times alone do not tell the full story. On paper, Aston Martin looked uncompetitive. Several seconds off the leaders. Limited mileage. And almost no proper long run completed. But inside the garage, the situation was far more serious than simple pace. Honda officially confirmed that the pre-season program had been extremely challenging due to a critical issue combining mechanical vibrations and high-voltage battery damage. This was not overheating in isolation. It was not just aggressive mapping. It was the V6 engine generating abnormal vibration frequencies that physically impacted the battery structure. In certain rev ranges, those vibrations aligned with the natural resonance of the chassis and battery mounting system. When that happens, energy does not dissipate. It amplifies. Micro-fractures begin internally. Electronics suffer stress. And temperature risk increases rapidly. That is why Alonso's final session ended abruptly. Telemetry showed warning signs associated with potential thermal escalation, and the team immediately shut the car down. No risk. No dramatic final push. Just stop. Now here is the key detail that changes the narrative. The issue was not limited to one faulty battery. It repeated across different units. That confirms it was systemic. An integration problem between power unit, hybrid system, and chassis architecture. And that is where Newey's extreme packaging concept enters the equation. The AMR26 was built with very tight bodywork. Minimal cooling volume. An aggressive aerodynamic philosophy designed to maximize efficiency. In theory, brilliant. In practice, unforgiving when vibration and heat combine. During aggressive energy charge and discharge cycles, temperature spikes became severe enough that Honda had to significantly reduce power output during longer runs. Which explains the visible straight-line deficit in Bahrain. Not a lack of horsepower potential. A forced limitation to protect hardware. So what did Aston Martin really reveal before Australia? That the AMR26 we saw in testing was not the real performance picture. It was a car running below its intended operating window. Protected. Restricted. Held back by necessity. And that is why the upgrades for Melbourne matter so much. Because if those structural reinforcements and revised hybrid strategies work, we may finally see what this car was designed to be. So what exactly did Honda change for Australia? This is where things become very technical and very bold. First, the battery mounting structure. Engineers focused on reducing how vibration energy travels from the V6 into the battery casing. Not by redesigning the entire engine, but by modifying how the battery is supported and isolated within the chassis. Think of it like adding a shock absorber inside a system that was previously rigid. Because when resonance builds, rigidity becomes the enemy. Absorption becomes the solution. Honda began bench testing the battery mounted to a full chassis structure, attempting to recreate the exact vibration signatures seen in Bahrain. That tells you this was not guesswork. It was controlled replication. Engineering under pressure. Second, the hybrid deployment strategy. The ERS maps have been revised to smooth out torque delivery, especially at lower engine speeds where vibration harmonics were most problematic. Less aggressive energy spikes. More progressive power release. Stricter charge and discharge limits per lap. Yes, that may reduce the explosive feel out of slow corners. But it dramatically lowers stress on the battery cells. And over a full race distance, that matters more than a single qualifying lap. Third, cooling. During testing, Aston Martin literally opened additional ventilation outlets just to manage temperature. For Melbourne, the philosophy shifted even further. More airflow through the side pods. Less extreme compression around the engine. A slightly less radical rear packaging concept. That costs aerodynamic efficiency. It increases drag. But it allows the Honda power unit to operate within safer thermal margins. And here is the crucial part. Internally, the goal for Australia is not maximum power. It is completing the full race distance without destructive vibration cycles. 300 kilometers. Race start stress. Safety car restarts. Full deployment under overtaking attempts. If the system survives that environment, development accelerates immediately. Because once reliability stabilizes, power can be layered back in step by step. But if instability reappears under race load, then the conversation changes. It becomes about architecture. About whether the extreme packaging concept needs deeper revision. And that is why what Aston Martin revealed feels so dramatic. They did not pretend the issue was minor. They acknowledged it was structural. They responded with hardware changes. They widened the operating window before chasing lap time. That is not panic. That is strategic correction. And when the lights go out in Melbourne, we will finally see if this intervention was enough to transform the AMR26 from fragile prototype into a platform ready to evolve. But here is where this story becomes even more intense. Because Australia is not just a technical checkpoint. It is a psychological one. Think about the timeline. Pre-season ends with limited mileage. Public frustration from the drivers. An admission that the project started behind schedule. And now, before a single championship point is scored, Aston Martin is forced to defend the integrity of its entire concept. That is pressure. Fernando Alonso has already hinted that the car was nowhere near its expected performance window in Bahrain. Lance Stroll admitted the package simply was not functioning as it should. And Adrian Newey acknowledged that the concept is radical and still being understood. When leaders speak that openly, you know this is not superficial. But here is the twist. Radical concepts often look worst before they look brilliant. Newey has a history of designing cars with massive development ceilings. Cars that are not fully unlocked in the first test. Cars that demand patience. The AMR26 was built with extreme aerodynamic compression and minimal cooling margin. That makes it sensitive. But sensitivity also means potential. If the reinforced battery structure absorbs vibration successfully. If the smoother ERS maps prevent destructive energy spikes. If the revised cooling architecture stabilizes thermal cycles, then suddenly the car gains breathing room. And breathing room means freedom. Freedom to increase deployment gradually. Freedom to refine the aero without overheating the hybrid system. Freedom to move from damage control to performance extraction. And here is something most fans are not considering. Under the current regulations, power unit manufacturers struggling early may gain additional development flexibility. That could allow Honda to introduce updates more aggressively later in the season. In other words, early weakness could translate into mid-season opportunity. But this only works if Australia proves stability. Race conditions are unpredictable. High fuel loads change vibration behavior. Dirty air affects cooling efficiency. Safety car restarts demand sudden full deployment. These are the exact scenarios that amplify mechanical stress. If the upgraded package survives all of that, the internal mood shifts instantly. Confidence returns. Engineers push harder. Drivers attack more aggressively. Momentum builds. But if the issue resurfaces, even in a smaller form, then the narrative darkens. Because that would suggest the problem runs deeper than mounting solutions and mapping adjustments. It would raise uncomfortable questions about architecture. And architecture changes mid-season are brutal. So when people say what Aston Martin revealed is insane, it is not exaggeration. They admitted the scale of the flaw. They admitted the car was running below its intended power. They admitted that Australia is more about survival than glory. That level of transparency before race one is rare. And that is exactly why Melbourne matters so much. This is not just the first race of the year. It is the first full stress test of a project that began under extreme ambition. When the lights go out, we will not just be watching lap times. We will be watching vibration signatures, thermal stability, energy deployment consistency. Because those invisible details will tell us whether the AMR26 is fragile, or whether this dramatic reveal is the beginning of a very dangerous comeback. Now let's talk about the part nobody wants to say out loud. What if this entire situation becomes the turning point of the season? Because in Formula One, the biggest breakthroughs often come right after the biggest embarrassment. Bahrain exposed the weakness. Australia will reveal the response. And what Aston Martin has effectively admitted is this. The AMR26 was designed with enormous potential, but an extremely narrow operating window. In testing, that window collapsed under real vibration and thermal loads. Now, for Melbourne, they are widening it. Not maximizing peak performance. Stabilizing the platform. That may not sound dramatic. But it is. Because once you widen the window, you create room for growth. Think about how development works over a season. If the power unit survives a full race distance without derating, engineers gain clean data. If clean data confirms structural stability, aggressive deployment can be reintroduced gradually. If deployment increases safely, straight line speed improves. If straight line speed improves, overtaking becomes possible. If overtaking becomes possible, confidence rises. Momentum builds. Everything compounds. But this only happens if Australia proves one thing: that the reinforced battery architecture and revised hybrid maps can handle 300 kilometers of race stress. And that is why insiders are treating Melbourne like a diagnostic reveal, not a performance showcase. Because if instability returns, even slightly, the timeline shifts. More conservative maps. More cooling compromises. More time spent firefighting instead of developing. And in a regulation reset year, losing development time is lethal. Now here is the deeper strategic angle. Newey has already signaled that the car will continue evolving rapidly, and that the version seen later in the season could look significantly different. That tells you this is not a static project. It is fluid, adaptive, responsive. If the Honda integration stabilizes early, the team can pivot from correction to optimization much faster than people expect. And remember, Honda is not standing still. With early struggles, regulatory allowances may grant additional development flexibility. That could become a hidden weapon in the second half of the year. But none of that matters if the foundation cracks again in Australia. So when the lights go out, do not just watch qualifying pace. Watch how the car behaves on lap 1 under full deployment. Watch restarts after safety cars. Watch whether power delivery remains consistent late in the race when temperatures peak. Those moments will tell the real story. Because this is no longer about hype. It is about proof. Proof that Aston Martin understood the flaw. Proof that Honda delivered a structural answer. Proof that the AMR26 can finally operate at the level it was designed for. If that proof arrives in Melbourne, the narrative shifts overnight. From crisis to comeback. And if it does not, the questions will only grow louder. Either way, Australia is not just the first race of the season. It is the moment that defines whether this ambitious partnership is fragile, or ready to become something far more dangerous once fully unleashed.